Okay, good morning, good afternoon or good evening everybody, depending on which time zone in which part of the world you are. Very big welcome to this evening for us in the United Kingdom's ITGA webinar panel. So we've got a roundtable session for you this evening, which I hope you'll find enjoyable. My name is Cooper Healey and I am the chair of the United Kingdom Town and Gown Association, which unsurprisingly is really like ITGA, but perhaps not as big and perhaps not as slick and perhaps not as sprinkled with Disney dust as ITGA seems to do things very well. We are really pleased as a UKTGA steering group here, representing institutions from across the United Kingdom. So we have people here from England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. We've got people here who are university officers. We've got people here who are police officers. We've got people here who are city council officers. And we've got colleagues that work across in the private sector in what we call the PBSA sector, purpose-built student accommodation. So we've got a really wide range from the length and breadth of the United Kingdom represented here. We've got a wealth of experience amongst our webinar panel today. And what we're going to do is really sort of try to give you the great British perspective on all things COVID and how we've been coping across in the United Kingdom since we were locked down 8 months ago today, in fact, when that first was imposed upon us. So one of the skills some of our colleagues that are listening as audience participants are going to need to employ today is your listening skills, because as I've explained, we've got a really wide range of people from across the United Kingdom, and that inevitably means that we've got a very wide range of accents. So you're going to hear lots of different accents from Northern Ireland, from Birmingham, from Croatia, Tati, I think, from Wales, from Scotland, from Manchester, and they've all got their own fabulous nuances. So we really look forward to any queries about people's comments or what they're saying. Please drop it in the chat and I will try to translate if something's been missed. And for colleagues on steering group, as we know, let's speak slowly and clearly, Dee. Right, so I'm going to ask my colleagues who are sitting on panel today to introduce themselves, their name, their job description and the institution which they study at. I'm going to nominate the first steering group member and then they're going to move through the panel. So Poppy.
Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing okay out there this afternoon. I'm Poppy, I'm the off-campus student affairs officer based at Manchester Student Home, so Super Cooper is my boss, and I'm jointly employed by University of Manchester and Manchester Metropolitan University, and I nominate Rory.
Thanks, Poppy. I'm Rory Cunningham. I'm the Community Liaison Manager for the University of Exeter, which is in Devon in the UK. I'm originally from Ireland, hence the slightly hybrid accent, and I nominate Leslie.
Hi everyone, I'm Leslie Caldwell. I'm the Community Engagement and Social Responsibility Officer for the University of St Andrews here in Scotland, and I nominate Claire.
Hey everyone, I'm Claire Bent. I am the Community Engagement Manager for the University of Birmingham in the Midlands in the UK. And I nominate Tatty.
Hi, I'm Tatjana Walker. I'm the area manager for Unite Students, who are the largest purpose-built student accommodation provider in the whole of the UK. And I am going to pick Mark.
Thank you, Tati. Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Rainey. I work for a local authority, which is Manchester City Council, and I'm a strategic lead for neighbourhoods, and the student areas are in my remit or my responsibility for the council. And I nominate Mike.
Hi everybody, I'm Mike. I'm the Student Liaison Officer working for South Wales Police here in Wales, and I work with the universities in Cardiff and other colleagues at the Student Liaison around the country as well. And I nominate Katie.
Sorry, unmuting problems. I'm Katie Latchford. I'm Head of Accommodation, Conferencing and Events for Canterbury Christchurch University. And I nominate Amanda.
Hello, afternoon, everyone. I'm Amanda Jackson. I'm the Sustainability Programme Officer for the University of Leeds in God's old country, in the good old county of Yorkshire. So, hello. And I nominate Dee.
Hi, I'm Dee Corbett, the Community Engagement Manager at Queen's University Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I nominate Matt.
Hello, I'm Matt. I'm a neighbourhood team leader for Devon Cornwall Police. Part of my patch covers Exeter University, so I liaise quite a lot with Rory. And I haven't got a handy list on the screen to nominate anyone because I'm using the web client, unfortunately. So if we can have a volunteer.
Okay. That's okay. Thank you, Matt. I think there's just one more person to introduce, which is the lovely Rich from Greater Manchester Police. Rich.
Good morning. My name is Richard Timson. I'm the District Commander for South Manchester, which covers the University of Manchester and Manchester Metropolitan University.
Thank you, Rich. And Rich was having technical difficulties, so he's dialed into this webinar today, which is a shame because he's very handsome. We can't see him. So thank you very much to all of the panelists. And if we can move then through to sort of one of the first questions that I wanted to pose was really around student return. So obviously in the UK, students return usually in late September. I think in the States it's around about mid to end August, so you go slightly earlier than we do. We intake in September, and clearly we wanted to think about how we were going to onboard students, and in many respects we have this, you know, a sort of hybrid blended learning experience. So some of it's online, some of it's on campus. But one of the things we all had to consider in an off-campus sense was how we were going to enforce COVID regulation breaches. So legislatively, the government set out that if we did not follow the rules of distance or rules of six or the tiered rules in our regions, or indeed larger lockdowns, which we currently have, what were we going to do about those students? So we were going to fine them for having parties off campus, for instance. And what did we do around that? And would we suggest that now we're a couple of months into the academic year coming up to Christmas, has that modified student behaviour for the better? And I think because I'm relatively biased, I'm going to throw that open to the greatest city on earth and the partnership that we have in mighty Manchester. I'm going to ask Poppy, Rich and Mark to address that question, please.
Thanks, Cooper. So for those of you that have had the opportunity to hear Cooper and I speak at some of the ITGA conferences, or more recently the virtual webinars, you'll know that we're constantly banging on about how fantastic Manchester is as a city. We've got 100,000 students here. And also, just for context, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we're currently in another national lockdown at the moment over here in the UK, that we'll speak about more as we go on. That's supposed to be lifted in early December, but we'll see how things go. So for those of you that have heard Cooper and I speak before, we are very passionate about Manchester, and one thing that we feel very proud of is the strength of our partnership. And we've worked with colleagues from the city and also the police for the last sort of 10 years plus. And I think before we get on to the inner workings of how we've been able to respond to some of the challenges around off-campus behaviour particularly, the strength of that partnership, I believe, and it'd be interesting to get Rich and Mark's view on this, has really enabled us to pivot and to respond to the challenges that have been presented to us. In terms of the demands on the partnership's time, we've seen complaints and incidents in off-campus communities increase by approximately threefold, really. So it's turned into quite an industry across the partnership to try and manage that. But I really just wanted to sort of hammer home the point that I feel really proud of the work that we're doing in Manchester as a partnership. But I think given that Rich is the chair of our daily tactical action partnerships, it might be appropriate to bring him in here to explain how they work.
Thanks very much, Poppy. So for us here, certainly in Manchester, it's created significant challenges around COVID, not just for students, but in general, in trying to maintain the general public in following regulations and rules and not gathering and breach of COVID regulations. So we could foresee the problems occurring potentially before the students arrived. So we had lots of joint discussions between the student partnership group to try and think of how are we going to manage this when the 80,000 students are going to return back to the University of Manchester and Manchester Met University. So we felt that we needed to put in place some structures and governance around that on a daily basis. So one of the things that we implemented right at the start 10 weeks ago was a student partnership meeting, which is a daily meeting of partners from the student partnership, which includes representatives from the council, representatives from the universities, student union representatives, representatives from Manchester Student Homes and the police. And the purpose of that particular meeting that meets on a daily basis at 9:15 during the week is to discuss reports of student breaches, to discuss what action needs to take place in relation to those breaches, to discuss crimes against students during the past 24 hours, and also, most importantly, to discuss how we can communicate to try and mitigate the escalation of those breaches in terms of student gatherings. So we've to facilitate that on a daily basis, we have a document, an analytical document that's produced for us that provides us an update with the gatherings in terms of locations where those gatherings have taken place, and also what action has been taken, whether it's by the police, by Manchester City Council, by the university, etc. And at that meeting, we're able to talk tactically what we can do in addressing those breaches, or what has been done in addressing those breaches, but also as well trying to mitigate any further breaches. As we've developed over the past 10 weeks, we've had a significant amount of demand created off campus. But what we have done is throughout the weeks, what we've started to see is a decline through effective partnership work that's taken place. One of them's been through effective communications. We've also put in place on a weekly basis as a tactic a knock-on to student residents off campus to provide advice around health advice, well-being advice, but also reiterating the need for students to follow COVID regulations. And that partnership relationship has worked really, really well in trying to share information amongst ourselves and trying to come up with tactical enforcement. Now, we've been really keen not to be really forceful with the students, but clearly where there has been clear breaches, we've issued fixed penalties. The police have issued fixed penalties. And I think over the period of 10 weeks, we've issued over 200 fixed penalties. So we've been quite forceful, but the purpose of that is to make sure that we get the message out to the students not to breach COVID regulations. And also on the back of that, making sure that we send out the communications to students and to residents what the police and partners are doing to try and ensure that people are following the COVID regulations and people aren't breaching those regulations. And that effective partnership has worked really, really well over the past 10 weeks. The issues we've had more recently is the activity on campus. Cooper, do you prefer me to speak about that later, or would you like me to speak about that now?
I mean, let's go all in while we're here with Manchester now.
Okay then, so more recently we've had some issues on campus where we've had large gatherings of students on campus, and each of the campuses have their own security, both at the Manchester Met University and also the University of Manchester. And just because of the sheer numbers, the security have found it very, very difficult to control the gatherings of university students. on top of that as well, the university students have been very frustrated in the fact that they've not been able to have their usual university experience, because most of the university lectures have been done online, and most of the activity that normally students would engage with, such as going out and partying, they've been unable to do that. So there's been a lot of frustration placed by students around that. Also as well, there's been frustrations at the fact that students have been having to pay accommodation and university fees when they've not been having that full university experience. And due to that, that's created frustrations and tension with some students. So the university security found it very difficult to manage that. But also from a policing perspective, we've been quite reluctant to engage with going onto campuses and dealing with gatherings of students, because from our perspective, the demand for us has been quite high anyway, and with dealing with off-campus and also our business as usual activity. And also the reputational risks that poses by seeing police going onto university campuses and enforcing COVID regulations. So we've been very reluctant to do that. Okay.
Yeah, I think, yeah, thank you very much. I think it's important to draw that distinction as the difference between UK and US campuses as well, in that in the UK, we don't have campus police in the same way that you have in the United States. So campus is seen as the university's problem in many respects by local police forces, and perhaps we can get some other updates on that in a little while. I do want to talk about how the media spotlight has drawn attention to town gown issues, and again that will be a story many of us are familiar with, but for those of you that are interested, if you were to Google the University of Manchester, England right now, you would see a number of headlines and you would see some of the actually quite large scale issues that we've been dealing with there in an on-campus sense. And I think for us as off-campus practitioners, that might pose questions about why has that nature of partying changed? What we're hearing is that it's actually pushing people off campus into on-campus premises because that's where the party's at. And, you know, young people are going to go where the party is at. There's a whole host of stuff, and I could literally run a webinar for half a day talking about just the Manchester perspective. But I'm really keen to bring Mark Rainey in, because we do have the holy trinity here of Manchester town gown, in that we've got university police, as Rich as a senior police officer spoke, and now I just want to get Mark Rainey's take on how the local authority, Manchester City Council, have reacted to the student return in the partnership work that we do. Mark.
I think, well, we've been a key part in helping for the past 10 years now, with working with the universities, the student unions, and the Greater Manchester Police. And I think Richard has probably said what I was going to pick up, to be honest, as well, because those daily tactical meetings, but probably other few things, rarely. The whole thing has been from a preventative approach. So we want the students to enjoy their experience in Manchester. That's what we want to happen. So our whole approach is being about preventative expectations of behaviour, have fun, but there are consequences if the behaviour is not adhered to. And that's on the university being quite clear, haven't they, with all of that. Yeah. But also, sorry, my internet is...
And now you're on mute, Mark.
We're fine.
Anyway, thank you for that.
Sorry, my screen.
It's okay, Mark. You just work that out and I'll keep talking. I think suffice to say, if we were going to talk about lessons learned from Manchester and student return, definitely that daily tactical action partnership that we're having, a morning briefing between all the partners, has been one of the success stories out of a quagmire of difficulty that we've had to deal with student return, aside from academic learning and teaching. I think that would be fair to say. If I'm right in thinking we've got another police university partnership on the panel today with Rory and Matt. Rory from Exeter, I wonder if you could perhaps talk about your experience in the city and working in partnership with your police force, with Matt to jump in.
Sure, yes, and I'm sure Matt can correct me if this is wrong, but we have been working really closely with Devon and Cornwall Constabulary, Matt and his team, and also Exeter City Council. And I think one of the key principles really is just the swift and efficient sharing of information as soon as incidents occur or when they are dealt with, and the dividing out of what we do as well. So we have a system where I do follow-up visits to every single student household that comes onto our radar, regardless of whether or not the police have taken action too. So there's a sort of a double whammy of things that we apply. But yes, I think obviously information sharing is pretty crucial, and being able to respond swiftly. The police have, again, Matt may be able to say a bit more, but we've had resource in the form of a response vehicle that the police have invested in to help with that swiftness, or on-campus security have gone off-campus. They traditionally do in Exeter anyway. And at really peak times, we also have input from environmental health, who dedicate some officers who also travel in a vehicle, and we all keep in close coordination on radio. So we all acknowledge the different kind of boundaries and powers we've got, but by working together, we can hopefully help nip things in the bud. The process so far has meant that we have had some fines for sure, but in most instances, fingers crossed, very few repeat visits. So we are managing to kind of keep that impact, and hopefully Matt agrees with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a really good exercise in information sharing between the two organisations, and dealing with it from both sides as opposed to one-sided. And I think that's worked quite well. As Rory said, we've had very few repeat offenders or repeat houses where it's off campus, and that seems to be keeping a lid on things. We just have little bubbles of things popping up here and there, but it's nothing too drastic, if I'm honest.
That sounds good. And I mean, Exeter, I suppose, is quite, just for context for people, it's not a city-based university, is it? It's a rural location.
Well, it's not a city like Manchester, certainly, or London, but we are one of the most sort of biggest and vibrant cities in the southwest. So it's a small city, yeah.
But the campus is quite rural, right?
Not really. Well, I
went to Exeter once.
It's all relative.
I've gone to the bar.
Yeah, we're on a hill, which isn't very helpful. It doesn't help with the whole kind of you know, ivory tower analogy. But yeah, well, I mean, we're not as cosmopolitan as perhaps Manchester, but we're probably getting there.
That's okay. You know, we'll let you catch up, I suppose, at one point. I wanted to talk about some best practice examples quickly, and I know I'm going to pick on Claire Bentz from Birmingham, because Claire, you had quite a good engagement example that worked well with your local landlords. Did you want to talk about that?
Yes, there's a couple of main pieces of engagement work that we've been doing with our local landlords and lettings agents in the private sector. We set up at the start of the year, literally just before the pandemic started, our lettings membership scheme, which invites local landlords and agents to be a part of a community of practice, and also to encourage best practice amongst one another, but also see that translated across the whole of the letting scene in the Selly Oak area. So the University of Birmingham is a campus university with literally just outside the gates is it's an area called Bournebrook, and we have around 20,000 students living literally on the doorstep of the university. So the main high street is filled with lettings agents, and so there's this whole dynamic that goes on. But getting them involved at an early stage was really helpful. And also because we'd launched this, I don't know about any of you, but I find often that in a crisis, relationships are cemented, things can be moved forward really, really quickly. It's like if you do residential work with anybody, you can sometimes accomplish more in a weekend than you can in a year of work with them. And so that's moved us forward, but also as a part of the work we've been doing, we've hosted virtual community town halls. Do you want me to talk about those, Cooper, or leave those for later?
Yes, yeah, let's do that.
So our virtual community town halls have been really great. Our Director of Public Health in Birmingham, Justin Varney, has been working very closely with the university. And so what we decided to do quite early on, back in June, we held our first one, was to hold community town halls where local members of the community who had concerns about university, concerns about student impact on the local area, because there was some quite bad publicity at the time about students being massive vectors for the spread of COVID. We wanted to invite community members to come and ask difficult questions, find out information and be reassured. So we had a panel which was made up of our Director of Security and Emergency Planning, Director of Student Affairs, myself, one of our Guild of Students, Student Union representatives, and our Director of Public Health for the whole of the city. And we had various people coming along to that meeting. It was a virtual town hall, but it went really well, and it enabled people to ask questions in a way that they might not have done before. And I think it encouraged that sense of transparency and openness, and of the fact that we had nothing to hide, that we weren't plotting or planning or trying to do anything behind closed doors, but that we were genuinely seeking to work with them as the community. As community practitioners, all of us are aware of the ladder of engagement, and the last thing we want to do is just communicate with our community. We want to collaborate with them, and so that enabled a new level of collaboration that was really kind of impactful, and our police were involved in that as well, and were able to answer questions about particularly the policing of COVID and how that was going to happen.
Right.
So particular areas of practice that we've really invested time in, and they've really paid off for us.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Claire. There was a number of things I want to pick up on that, and communications and engagement's definitely a strand I want to touch on. But I thought we might also nick across to Wales and talk to Mike Neate from Cardiff Police about the Welsh situation, what's happening in Wales now, and I suppose in terms of things like the breaches of COVID regulations, would you be able to put a kind of number on how many fixed penalty notices have been issued in the student population kind of thing? Could you give us an update, Mike?
Yeah, sure. So within Cardiff and the city region, we've got 3 universities, and in that region in excess of 70,000 students. And we had to work quite quickly when obviously the initial regulations came in that started just at the time of the arrival of the students. So with that in mind, and being very aware that the regulations are different in different parts of the country as well, between England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, we wanted to make sure that we were seen to be proportionate. But again, working in partnership with the universities and the local authority, and trying to be fair to the students, you know, who probably were a little confused about some of the regulations coming from different parts of the country and parts of the world as well. So we introduced student behaviour contracts as our primary focus before fixed penalties. And to date, we've probably, I don't have a specific number, but we've definitely issued in excess of 300 of those. But I would say that they've worked quite well and served the purpose that they were intended for in getting the message out there, and just making people realise that, yes, you know, we've got regulations here, they are different, and that people need to pay attention to the fact that they're different in different parts of the country. We are moving to a different phase with those who still remain to breach the regulations in terms of fixed penalties. But we're just kind of moving to that now, really, because I think the behaviour contracts did what they were intended to do and helped us engage with not just the students, but also the community within the city as well, and let the residents in the city see that we were being proportionate with our response, but we were highly engaging across all levels, really. So, and the vast majority of students were very receptive to that as well. You know, we haven't really had anybody who's offended, if you like, on a second occasion that's come to our attention. There are obviously still those who do continue to breach the regulations, and we're working through dealing with those. But I think the student behaviour contracts were sort of implemented quite well and worked well across the city, really. So that's interesting, because if student behavioural contracts were issued, which they weren't necessarily in Manchester, you've had presumably a sort of better response to that and lower FPNs. Yeah, I think it was a decision made by everyone that we'd come together, and the behaviour contracts are sort of represented across the universities and the local authority, that we're all sort of in this together, trying to show that we're being proportionate, that those that we still issued some fixed penalties up until recent weeks, but they were only in the cases where we felt that it was necessary. But as I said, now, you know, those who are still here and still within the city, you know, they're obviously fully aware of what the regulations are, and the fact that whether they're changing or not, there are some regulations they need to be aware of, and that we're moving to that phase now where you really should have sort of heeded the advice that's been given to a certain extent. So we are entering a stage where fixed penalties are starting to be used more frequently than behaviour contracts are. Okay, and I think it's probably, again, for non-British people that are listening, it's hard to underestimate how many changes have been made within the United Kingdom since March. In a regional sense, as I mentioned earlier, parts of the countries were divided up into certain tiers 1 through to 3. Tier 1 being, you know, the least restricted areas, and tier 3, of which Manchester falls or fell under, being the most restricted. And the advice and guidance from government is confusing, to say the least, and at worst an absolute nightmare to try to wade through. And you know, us as, you know, A, first citizens, and B, professionals trying to get that information and interpret it and then send that out to, you know, a wider body has been, let me tell you, an industry in itself. It really hasn't been clear. We've lacked that guidance, I feel. I'd like to just skip over. I'm really conscious that I'm trying to get everybody in, and I know we've got some Q&A, which I will definitely look to answer towards the end of the session, but I wanted to sort of hop over the water a bit now and bring Dee Corbett in from Queen's in Belfast, because I know Belfast as a city has had a different sort of approach in many respects to some of the work that you've been doing COVID related there. Do you want to bring in some of that learning, Dee, for us?
Yep, we took a fairly robust approach. Northern Ireland went into additional measures over a month ago on the 16th of October, and that created certainly a high response from the police in terms of, we have issued a lot of the fixed penalty notices for COVID, and that attracted then students been identified specifically in properties. And unfortunately, both universities, we've seen a high number of our students responded and identified, which then resulted in, we took quite a robust approach in terms of a 14-day suspension period and an investigation, and then a follow-up in terms of conduct regulations. So that has been very robust, and that has certainly increased our workload significantly this year. I think there's some learning for us that we should probably been more effective in around communications, and I know that's one of the areas that you want to talk about. And certainly I would see that we were very focused on a reactive position, instead of, in hindsight, we should have been more robust in our communications, and probably also created a more effective approach in terms of getting the message out and putting probably volunteers on the ground in terms of trying to moderate behaviour. But we do traditionally get a significant level of non-students in the area where our students live, and unfortunately we do have a high incidence of antisocial behaviour at key periods of the year. And that obviously is Freshers and Halloween, and our St. Patrick's Day traditionally attracts that as well. So the police have taken a robust approach for the short period, given the high density of HMOs within a very small area, and the very real concerns from our communities in relation to that transmission. And also in Northern Ireland, a significant number of our local students would travel home at weekends. So we were concerned about that transmission. And I think that has proved right, probably, that certainly there's been a high level of transmission from possibly from students and also in the community generally. So we're in a situation, there's no visiting at the moment of any private houses, and that obviously creates a reaction and a difficulty and a challenge for students. And I think it has been, we have to acknowledge, there have been real challenges for young people this year in relation to these changes, and a very different university experience for them. So we've worked very effectively with the students, but it is a very difficult time for all students this year. But I think communication needs to be improved, and certainly the robust response has had an impact.
Okay, I'm definitely going to come back to you then, Dee, on communication in a little while, because certainly that's been a topic of conversation consistently for us, and I know is a bugbear for many of us. But let's just bring in Leslie here from the University of St Andrews. Now, for those golfers amongst us, you will know where St Andrews is located. It's a very pretty town on the very top and coast of Scotland, although my geography is not great today, apparently, is it, Exeter? So maybe Leslie, you can tell us what you've been doing in St Andrews since March.
Yeah, thanks, Cooper. I think key for us is exactly the makeup of our town. So we are quite a small town. We've got about total population is about 16,000, and about half of that are permanent residents. So really, our students make up half of that population, and we have quite an elderly population. So that has meant that there was a real fear, in all honesty, about the students coming back. And really, we've just been talking about communication, and actually that was really key to everything that we have done. Our response to COVID for a town and ground approach has been, as much as we can, open and transparent communication, and spent the summer keeping in touch with local stakeholders, feeding that back into senior management so that the concerns and comments from our community was fed back into our plans, and trying to ensure we kept our community as informed as we could, because there was some real worries and fears. And I think there's also an element of a misunderstanding. Certainly at a certain point when the students returned, we were getting a lot of comments and concerns from the community about seeing students not socially distancing, seeing students in groups. And at certain points around our guidance in Scotland, there had to be a reminder. I felt I was quite a lot replying to concerns highlighting that actually students will be living in homes with 10 other people, or in flats. They're already in what exists as being bubbles, so they do not need to social distance with members of their households. So by immediately seeing a group of students not socially distancing does not mean they're breaking the rules, and I think that was something that I spent a lot of time trying to sort of alleviate concerns in that sense. But we've certainly seen where we are, we've got some wonderful beaches, we've got great outdoor space. So we were certainly encouraging our students to be outdoors because it was far safer. But again, that comes back with the community seeing groups of students, and we're seeing a lot of beach parties as well, that we would get reports, calls, that there were hundreds of students, and then the police would go down and there would be groups of students who were socially distancing and doing everything right. So I was always thankful for the community getting in touch with us, because it's really positive to see the community looking out for themselves and looking out for each other. But certainly sometimes that there was rules that weren't being broken, and we had a really good relationship with the police. We ended up, we've been supporting additional patrols in the town, and that's meant that we are able to daily keep in touch with our police and react to concerns. If there's problem areas, for example, busyness outside one of the local supermarkets, we're able to ensure that we're hopefully ahead of the game, and that's been really key for us as well.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. I mean, again, it's coming up time and time again, isn't it? I think it's about communication. It was about that lack of understanding about what the rules were, both from the student perspective and from our local communities. That essentially then leading more into the fear of the transmission of the virus. You know, the communal living standards that students have, and again, mentioning comms is key. I'm conscious of time. I want to change tack a little bit with Tatty, and then I'm going to come back to Amanda and Katie, and we'll have a discussion generally about comms before I go to Q&A. But Tatty works for Unite, which is a private sector accommodation provider of how many thousand bedrooms in total, Tatty?
We have about 75,000.
75,000 bedrooms up and down the UK. Tatty is one of the strategic leads for the Leeds area, and has the viewpoint from the inside of that housing provision, really. Tatty, how have things been for you, and do you have any hot off the press information for us?
I certainly do. So it was interesting. There are a couple of reports that have only been published now this week, so within the last 5-6 days. Actually, to support some of the colleagues within the group, I'm just looking at it. So we had our welfare incidents have increased across the entire portfolio, especially in October 2020, and mainly was driven by the antisocial behavior. We have also seen that the lockdowns didn't seem to have an effect in a trend of number of welfare incidents being reported. And across the country, there has been a change in student behavior and the way they interact with each other at the university. What we are actually saying that we had rises in all the security related reports that we had increased 3 times, increase year on year. So we were potentially looking at 124 incidents at the same time last year, comparing to 379. Students were looking for the outlets across the country, so that's from Wales, England, all the way up to Scotland, just outlets. You couldn't go to a pub, so they were just organizing their own parties in-house. Across the country, we've seen the different levels of support from the police, depending on what they could provide at the time, depending on what was going on in the rest of the city. I mean, this weekend alone in Leeds, we had James Bailey Park, and Amanda will know about this. We had 7 vehicles showed up, 7 vans. There was about 40 police officers for a party of 100 people who just did not want to disperse for about 4 hours. So it varied across. The other thing, we've seen an increase, and the data is showing that we have seen an increase in genuine medical welfare, the stress from students, isolation. I think our student services managers, which we have them across the country, have been dealing with more and more cases, increase in suicides, which is quite sad, or attempted suicide, self-harming. Again, very, very difficult, bleak picture to paint. However, saying that, for those of you within the UKTGA, I have shared with you the report, the survey and the results of the survey that we conducted in June, which was talking about that at the time, so that was for the academic year 2019-2020, we had at almost 9 in 10 students, so 89% students were keen to get on campus as soon as possible. And it's quite nice to see that the most recent survey results, they agree that although they have not expected that their first year at the university is going to look like this, they value their time at the university and they're genuinely keen to come back. 93% of the students intend to stay on at the university despite COVID-19 challenges, even with online learning, blended learning, reduction in face-to-face. They have almost 3/4, so 72% students that have also said they transitioned well to the life at the university this year. They are communicating, and they are living in partnership with the rest of their peers, parents. Parents are still very much worried about their safety, children's safety, and I think across the UK, it doesn't matter which university you work for, I think we all had complaints from parents, and you were dealing with a lot of parents who were asking, shed a lot of questions, you know, what is a cleaning regime, how are you going to take care, how are we going to social distance, and everything else. But overall results are actually quite positive, looking at now in January, and with even now, today's news that another vaccine has been created, which is showing 95% success rate, even in people over 60. Brilliant news. And as I said, this survey is actually telling us that students want to come back, that they genuinely want to, they're very keen. I think overall, that's a genuinely positive picture for everybody across university sector.
Yeah, thank you, Tati. I think that is positive, and certainly it's been replicated in Manchester that we are seeing students house hunting now and signing contracts for next academic year with a view to coming back, which I didn't think would happen, or at least not this early. I do wonder if we'll have a protracted season, but yeah, students are signing up, and please, thank you for giving us some positivity, because there's not much. The research that your company have done with that survey is really useful. Would we be okay to circulate it beyond to people who have attended today's webinar as a resource?
Yeah, absolutely. I will send you all three of them. So I will send you a little bit of information on the welfare. I'll resend you the one from June, and you already received today the one from November. So yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just picking up then, I'm really conscious of time. Katie and Amanda, I wonder if you can do a double hander from two entirely different cities. Just around, I think, communications, because I've got so much that I can say about communications and not enough time to communicate it. I think we all know that the general feeling is that communications are key in many respects. It's all we have available to us, particularly when we're working remotely. How are we engaging the student body? Do we think our institutions have got it right? Talk to me about communications. Go.
I'm going to go really quickly, Amanda, because what I'd like to say is something slightly different, because for us, we had high numbers of COVID cases off campus and on campus at the beginning of the year, and then they dropped. And around us in the city, the numbers increased. And for me, it was a difficulty of communicating that. It's that kind of, it's not us, we're not driving this. We've pulled our numbers down and we're managing this well, and we're doing a good job here. Actually, this has been driven outside of us, when actually I think everyone just wanted to point the finger at universities for moving so many students across the country at once. So that was really what I wanted to say on comms. Some really hard messages that we haven't been able to put out there, which we're doing a pretty good job.
And in Leeds, Amanda?
So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Comms, it's absolutely been fundamental to kind of reopening plans and reassuring our communities that we're doing that safely and with their safety in mind. So I think we had a bit of a run up to it, didn't we, in Leeds, because unlike many other kind of peer universities, cities like Manchester, our students didn't go home. They stayed in Leeds for the whole summer period, which presented some challenges for us, let me tell you. But what it did mean is that as we entered into those different tiers of lockdown and different sanctions that came into place around kind of COVID breaches, we were able to keep communicating those right up to and leading up to kind of term start, which I think has had a real improvement on behaviour. We've certainly, at this point of the year, I'd have kind of 100 kind of complaints under my belt of large scale house parties out in our local community. And that just hasn't been the case. I mean, arguably they had a long run at it over the summer period. Maybe they kind of partied themselves out by the time term came, but certainly kind of, yeah, that lead up to and that constant communication has led to a positive change in behaviour. And certainly the conversations on the doorstep when our police colleagues and our council colleagues go and have a conversation with our students, they're well aware of the rules, to the point they're running out the back door to try and avoid any potential sanctions. So yeah, they're not averse to kind of trying to avoid, but of course they've got wise to that, and there's usually an officer at the front door and an officer at the back door catching in both ends. But just a point on comms, I think one of the lessons learned, or maybe it's just an observation, I think, we talk a lot about kind of that collaboration partnership with the city, but we haven't really touched on the collaboration and partnership with our internal colleagues. And I think this situation, to me, has highlighted to maybe some colleagues that maybe haven't been quite so kind of involved, or communities and students in community hasn't been quite so on their radar, is now well and truly on their radars. Whether that's for kind of different reasons, so maybe how we as colleagues working in off-campus relations are doing it, but certainly the help has been appreciated. It's really kind of put community and students in communities at the forefront of thinking, and I've been sort of thrust into more conversations and more meetings internally to kind of get our kind of institutional approach right. So that's been a real kind of positive, and it's something I'm certainly going to kind of capitalize on and kind of keep to my chest, kind of going forwards, and hopefully kind of maintain that relationship going forward. So that's
okay.
It.
That's some. No, thank you. That's both some really positive examples. It looks like Poppy wants to come in.
I've got my hand up, Cooper.
I can see.
So, Amanda, I was really interested in what you were saying, because Cooper and I had been almost joking to say, well, it took a global pandemic for our sort of agenda to be raised or pushed to the forefront. I think that without going into too many specifics about the significant issues that have been occurring on campus, but as Cooper said, you can just go and Google them. I think that's unfolding about how that's going to impact on us from an off-campus setting. So I think that the perception is very much from a large cohort of students, and this has been amplified in the media, that the focus from the university has shifted away from the health and well-being, their health and well-being. And I think that that's creating potential challenges for officers that have roles either in enforcement or responding to and tackling antisocial behaviour as well. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out, and I think that's definitely the significant issues on campus, and the role of the media is going to present more challenges for us off campus, I think, but perhaps that's a story for another day in a few weeks or months' time.
Okay, yeah, I feel like we could have concentrated on comms the whole way through this as just one subject area, because there is just a myriad of issues around that, and I think some of us have got it right and some of us have got it very, very wrong. And I do wonder about the levels of student engagement with that as well, because that's the biggest thing. Where are we, is the institution capable, able to communicate with its student body in the way in which the students wish to be communicated, which I think is probably an entirely different webinar subject. We're coming to the top of the hour, and I know we've got some Q&A. Claire, this one's probably for you. Noelle is asking, how do you reach out to absentee landlords, and what kinds of strategies did you use to get them involved?
So the main tactic that we've used is to offer people something so good that they're missing out by not being a part of it. So a huge part of that has been that we have been meeting with our landlords and agents roughly every 2 weeks. We have had various different people on the phone calls with them. One of the Zoom meetings was our Director of Public Health. One of them was Neate, one of our directors, who's on this call as well, I think, as a member, as an attendee. And so we were doing that kind of thing. We asked our landlords and agents who had initially joined the lettings membership scheme to publicise it amongst their peers, because a lot of the absentee landlords manage their properties through lettings agents. One of the main things that we did was get the largest lettings agents to become a part of the lettings membership scheme, and then the landlords will find out information from them. Also, because we are delaying our housing season this year, only members of the lettings membership scheme will get a free place at our virtual housing fair in January. Everyone else is going to have to pay between £100 and £500 to come. So
right,
we're making their life easier if they're a part of lettings membership scheme, and if they're not, then they're going to have to pay more or not have the easy access that everyone else does.
Okay, also Claire, this is another one for you, I think, in terms of, you might have kind of answered it, but what level of buy-in did you get from the agents and landlords to engage with what you were doing, and any barriers that you came across?
So one of my team, I've been in post for 2.5 years now, but one of my team, Jackie, who heads up our private sector stuff, has been in post for years. She's worked at the university for 30 years. She has built lots of relationships. There's nobody in the letting scene that she does not know. And so we were able to capitalise on that to increase buy-in. A lot of them, one of the main things we did was we worked out who the loudest voices in the lettings community in Selly Oak were. And we invited them to become a part of a focus group because we said that we wanted them to help shape what the lettings membership scheme would be. So as a focus group, we had 8 landlords and agents who were a part of that. They developed that. We then went out wider and wider and wider and invited people in as we had the grassroots base built up. So it's using basic community organising.
Yeah.
Those of you who do
yeah.
organising.
Okay, thank you. Another question that I can probably quickly answer from Noel is, can we explain what a penalty fine is? So a fixed penalty notice, and what kind of strategies are you using for repeat offenders? Is Rich still on the line? Do you want to quickly explain what a fixed penalty notice is?
So fixed penalty notice, it can be issued by the police. It's £100 fine. And if the repeat offences, it basically doubles. It's issued, as I say, by police officers, and it's something that we do at the very extreme. What we have been doing is what we've called it the 4 E's, where we've been engaging, explaining and encouraging, first of all, students, but where there is a clear breach of the COVID regulations, where there's, you go into a house and there's lots of people partying, then a fixed penalty notice has been issued. And what we've been doing in Manchester is any fixed penalty notice that's been issued, that information has been around the individual that has been issued that fixed penalty notice has been referred to the university for consideration for internal university disciplinary action as well.
Okay. Cooper, sorry, can I jump in there and just add to that as well? If there's Noel, if there's a repeat of an incident, then the city, the antisocial behaviour action team within the city council will also take steps to enforce something called a premises closure order, which is effectively closing the property and making sure that the tenants are removed from that property. So it's not something that they do lightly. I think Cooper will remember that there's been one in our lifetime that was bit of a nightmare really, and a bit of a PR disaster. However, they are taking steps against one particular group as we speak now.
And I think party hosts can also be fined up to £1,000, sorry, £10,000 if they've hosted the party, £10,000 if they're the host of the party, or i.e. the tenant in the property. There's a question from Gail about trend data, which I think Katie might have some answers to.
Yeah, so all of the universities have a designated single point of contact who works with our local public health team. So they work at a regional level, at a city level, and feed up into national public health structures. We're reporting to them, to the Office for Students, which is a national body, daily, and to the Department for Education daily on the data that we have, and they're also then sharing trend data with us that they're getting from the National Track and Trace scheme. And really similar to what you're seeing in Vermont, we are seeing that cases are basically coming out of home settings. What we have seen in the last couple of weeks is a trickle up in the numbers, because just before we went into lockdown, a lot of our students decided to go out and enjoy the pubs one last time before they got closed. So I think we're seeing the tail end now in the next couple of days of that last bit of large scale socialising. But really similar to you, so we do get that data. It's just quite hard to get that message out because I don't think anyone really wants to hear it in terms of
and I think thank you Katie. I think what we didn't get round to discussing today before we fall off air is the mass testing that's just been announced by government, that students have to have in order to access, if you like, a travel corridor that our government have created by asking universities to stop all face-to-face teaching 2 weeks earlier than they would before Christmas vacation. So allowing for a window of testing, moving those students around the country to enable them to go back home to their families for Christmas. Our suspicions are that there are many students that just will not present for testing and will continue and travel anyway. Some of their ability to travel will be curtailed by the increase in train and bus tickets. That has happened since this was announced. And so we'll be reliant on their parents, God bless them, come over and pick them up. I'm conscious that we're at 1 minute past 6 and I'm very aware of everybody's time. Rebecca Nash put a quick question in, well, it's not that quick actually, but with regards to increased normal household noise because students are staying at home more now that they're not studying in lecture halls in the traditional sense. I think from a Manchester perspective, we've not seen too many complaints on the back of that type of issue. Thankfully, that's not to say that those neighbours aren't having it. Poppy, have you got an opinion on that?
No, well, I think that there's quite surprisingly a lot more tolerance, and I think that the main issues are around the COVID breaches. But that's not to say that those noise complaints haven't been coming in. But I think that they're just being kind of swallowed up with the bigger issues that we're seeing.
Okay. Anyone else with a quick comment on that, Rory?
I would just add that. I mean, it's complicated. We are seeing, I mean, we've experienced a rise in calls and emails generally, but when you dissect those calls and emails, we're definitely getting a lot more from people, students within households who themselves are impacted by noise because of the kind of cabin fever environment. Another interesting category are the number of neighbours, local people, being forced to work from home for various reasons, or potentially even home educate children. So that kind of adds to the pressure as well. These tensions are maybe more symptomatic of the pressure of not being able to go anywhere else, as opposed to necessarily students being more antisocial than normal. But that nuance very, very often gets missed in how things are picked up and shared with the media, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've gone 3 minutes over time, and you know the saying it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Well, it's actually 6 o'clock here in the United Kingdom, and it's also Wine Wednesday for some of us. So Amanda nodding. I just want to say thank you very much to our panel. I really appreciate the time that you've given to us this evening. And I think we've all enjoyed ourselves, and we'd be more than happy to host a follow-up session like a similar one to this to let you know how we've all managed to get through the mass testing and student migration over Christmas and then student return in January, if that would be of any interest to all of you. Big shout out to ITGA as always for helping us host this panel. Thank you to Douglas, thank you to Beth. Please everybody have a lovely afternoon, evening, day, and we hope to see you all very soon. Stay safe, stay well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Happy Thanksgiving for next week.